Back in 2020, when the pandemic was still upending everything, I picked up a job driving for Uber to stay afloat. I'd recently lost my retail position and needed a fast way to bring in money. Working rideshare, especially during late-night shifts like I did, meant encountering all sorts of people. I got used to awkward moments, tipsy riders, and odd small talk. But none of that prepared me for what happened that one night. It was a Friday in October, just past midnight. I'd finished a drop-off near a hotel on the edge of town when another request popped up almost instantly. The pickup spot was about 6 minutes away, right in front of a strip mall bowling alley. Pretty normal stuff. The rider's name was Derek. I accepted and drove over. When I got there, the whole area was nearly empty. A few faint parking lot lights lit the place, but no other vehicles were around. The bowling alley seemed closed for the night. Under one of the lights stood a man. Gray hoodie, jeans, hands tucked into his pockets, head bowed like he was staring at his shoes. He was tall, probably 6'2". As I pulled in closer, he glanced up at me but didn't wave or move. I rolled my window down and asked, "You Derek?" He gave a nod, walked over slowly, and got in the seat directly behind me. I started the ride and confirmed the destination, which was listed as an address about 20 minutes out, somewhere in a neighborhood I'd never been to. "Yeah, that's it," he replied in a soft, steady tone. Something about the way he spoke struck me as odd, not like he was intoxicated or anything, more like there was just no emotion behind his words. Still, I didn't overthink it. We got moving, and for the first 5 or 6 minutes, he stayed completely silent. Every so often, I'd glance at the rearview mirror. Each time, he was sitting perfectly still, eyes locked straight ahead, not looking out the window, not scrolling on a phone, just staring directly at the back of my head. To ease the silence a bit, I asked him how his night was going. He paused for a moment before replying, "Just had to get out of there." I followed up with, "Out of where?" He responded, "Doesn't matter." I figured it was best not to press further. We kept driving. Around 15 minutes later, I noticed we were nearing the drop-off point, but the area felt unusually remote. There were no street lights, just big lots, dense trees, and long driveways. The closer we got, the more uneasy I felt. As we were coming up on the location, he suddenly leaned forward and said, "Actually, can you turn into that driveway right there?" He motioned toward a house on the right. The place looked completely dark, no lights on inside or outside. It had an overgrown yard, peeling paint, and not a single car in sight. Honestly, it looked like no one had lived there in years. I asked, "Is this your place?" He didn't answer that directly, just said, "Pull in." I hesitated for a second, but ended up turning into the driveway and parking near the front of the house. He stayed in the car. I turned around and asked, "Everything okay?" He was staring at the house and said, "Wait here," before stepping out. But instead of going to the front door, he walked around the side of the house and vanished from sight. I sat there for a couple of minutes, unsure what to do. The ride was technically still in progress, and I didn't want to cancel too early in case it affected my account. But something felt really off. My instincts were telling me he wasn't just running inside to grab something. Eventually, I manually ended the ride and marked it complete. I was just about to reverse out of the driveway when I saw him coming back toward the car, fast. His hands were empty, but the look on his face caught me off guard. It was this mix of intensity, either anger or some kind of thrill. I couldn't tell. I hit the unlock button, not wanting to cause a scene, but deep down, everything in me was warning me not to let him back inside. He opened the rear door and slid back into the seat, then said, "Take me to the other place." I turned and asked, "What other place?" He replied, "Just drive. I'll tell you." I told him he needed to enter the destination through the app. He didn't respond, just stared at me through the rearview mirror. I repeated more firmly this time, "I can't go anywhere unless it's in the app." Still no reply. After a pause, he finally said, "Just drive back to where you picked me up." At that point, I didn't feel like arguing. I pulled out of the driveway and headed toward the strip mall. The ride back was completely silent, but there was this weight in the air, like the tension was filling every inch of the car. I could feel him watching me. The hairs on my arms prickled. I glanced at the mirror a few times, and he was staring right at the back of my head. Trying to break the heaviness, I asked, "Rough night?" He answered, "You could say that." I followed up with, "Everything okay?" His reply was quiet but sharp. "Not yet." That was enough for me. I didn't ask anything else. When we reached the strip mall, I pulled into the same spot where I had picked him up earlier. I was about to say something when he leaned forward slightly and asked, "You ever think about how you're gonna die?" I froze for a second. Then I gave a nervous laugh and said, "Not really something I spend much time thinking about." He didn't smile, just leaned back in his seat, stared straight ahead, and after a few moments said, "I think about it all the time." Then, without warning, he opened the door and stepped out, but he didn't close it right away. He stood there, one foot in the car and one out, looking at me. Then he said, "You picked the wrong guy up tonight." He shut the door and walked away into the darkness behind the bowling alley. I sat frozen for a moment or two, heart racing. Finally, I pulled away and headed home, glancing in the mirrors the entire drive. Once I got back, I checked the trip history, and even then, something about it didn't feel right. When I checked the trip later, I noticed something strange. The name wasn't there anymore. It didn't say Derek. In fact, there was no name at all. No photo, no trip record, nothing. It was like the whole ride had been wiped clean. I reached out to Uber support and tried to report what happened. They told me the trip data couldn't be found. They said sometimes that can occur if the app crashes or if the rider cancels the trip midway. But I know for a fact I completed that ride. I know he got into my car, and I know what he said to me before he left. "You picked the wrong guy up tonight. I've never seen him again. And honestly, I hope I never do. Still, every time I get a request in a dimly lit lot or have someone sitting quietly behind me, that night flashes back in my mind. I think about how close things might have gotten to going wrong. Maybe he changed his mind last minute. Or maybe he was never planning to do anything at all, just wanted to scare someone. But even now, I still wonder what he meant and whether he ever ended up finding the car he was really looking for. This happened in 2021 while I was driving for Uber full-time. I live in a city that draws a steady flow of tourists, especially during the summer months, so if you put in the hours, Rideshare can be a decent gig. I usually worked at night, partly because I'm more of a night person and partly because the streets are clearer and tips tend to be better after bar close. The night it happened, it was around 1:30 a.m., a typical Saturday crowd. I had just dropped off a loud group of college students who spent the entire ride yelling over each other in the back seat. So when the next request came in and looked like it might be a quieter ride, I was relieved. The rider's name was Chris. The pickup location was listed on a narrow side street just off the downtown strip. What caught my eye, though, was that the pin seemed off. It wasn't near any clubs, apartments, or popular spots. It looked like it was close to the back end of an old strip mall. Still, I figured it could be a GPS glitch. That happens now and then. When I pulled up, there was a guy standing at the corner, hoodie on, jeans, looking down at his phone. I rolled down my window and called out, "Chris?" He nodded once and got in the back seat without saying a word. He didn't smell like he'd been drinking, and his speech was clear. No slurring or anything that made me think he was under the influence. He just seemed extremely quiet. Didn't greet me when he got in, and when I asked how his night was going, he didn't respond. Some riders just prefer not to talk, so I didn't take it personally. I started the ride and saw the drop-off was about 25 minutes across town in a suburban area I'd only been through once or twice before. That part of town gets pretty dark at night. Some sections have no streetlights at all, and the houses are spread out. It's a bit isolated. A few minutes into the drive, I noticed something strange. Chris had his phone out, but he wasn't using it. He wasn't typing or calling anyone. He was just holding it in his lap with the flashlight on, angled slightly so the light hit the back of my seat. Trying to keep things light, I asked, "Everything okay back there?" He mumbled, "Yeah," and turned off the light. After that, the ride went completely silent. 20 minutes of nothing but engine noise and this heavy tension in the air. I can't really explain it. It wasn't like he was doing anything threatening, but the vibe in the car felt wrong. He seemed like he was physically there but mentally somewhere else. Eventually, we reached the neighborhood and I followed the GPS to the listed address. As we pulled up, I noticed the house was totally dark. No lights inside, no porch light, nothing to suggest anyone was home. I asked, "Is this the place?" Chris didn't reply. He stayed still, just staring out the window past me. I turned around, looked at him directly and repeated, "Hey, is this it?" Still nothing. He just kept gazing past me. I asked again, louder this time. After a few seconds, he gave a small nod. So I shifted the car into park and said, "All right, have a good night." But he didn't move. He stayed seated, not even reaching for the door handle. I asked again, "You okay?" That's when he finally moved. He opened the door and stepped out, but didn't shut it behind him. Instead, he stood there, facing the house, just holding the door open like he was frozen. I stayed in my seat waiting. A few seconds passed, then 20, then a full minute, still no movement. Just as I was about to say something, he suddenly turned around, looked directly at me through the open door and said, "I need to go back." I blinked and asked, "Back where?" "To where you picked me up," he said, his voice completely flat, no emotion at all. I didn't know how to respond at first. That ride had taken nearly 25 minutes and I couldn't just reverse the trip. I told him he'd need to put in a new request through the app. But he didn't move, just stared at me with this intensity in his eyes. Then he said quietly, "Please, I need to go back." Again, I told him he'd have to use the app like before. And that's when he said something that genuinely unnerved me. "I can't," he said. "They're not gone yet." I stared at him and could only manage to ask, "Who's not gone?" He didn't reply. He stood there, still gripping the door, and I noticed he was breathing hard now, like something had shaken him. At that point, the tension was turning into real discomfort. I said, "Look, I can't take you unless you request it through the app." He kept eye contact for another moment, then slowly stepped back and shut the door. Without another word, he walked toward the house. Even though it was pitch dark and looked completely vacant, he headed straight for it. I waited until he reached the porch, then finally pulled away. As soon as I turned the next corner, I ended the trip in the app and started heading back toward downtown. A few blocks later, I stopped at a 24-hour gas station to grab a drink and use the restroom. I parked along the side of the building, went inside, and was back out maybe 4 or 5 minutes later. But when I returned to my car, my entire body froze. Chris was sitting in the back seat, same hoodie, same blank stare. I was sure I had locked the doors before going inside. I always do. But somehow, he was there. I opened the driver's door slowly and got in, never taking my eyes off him in the rearview mirror. "How did you get back in?" I asked him. He didn't answer the question, just said, "Take me back." I told him I was calling the police and reached for my phone. That's when he leaned forward, close enough that I could hear his breathing, and said, "They're still in the house." I don't know why, but I didn't make the call. Something about the way he said it didn't sound threatening. It sounded broken, like he was in the middle of something I couldn't quite understand. So I went along with it. I asked, "Whose house is that?" He replied, "My parents'." I followed up with, "Do you live there?" And he said, "Not anymore." That response sent a chill down my spine. Even though every instinct told me to get as far away from this situation as possible, I started driving back toward the house where I'd just dropped him off. As we got closer, I noticed his breathing getting heavier. He started to gently rock back and forth in his seat. At one point, he whispered, "They're still there. No matter what I do, they won't leave." When we pulled up again, nothing had changed. No lights on, no movement, just the same dark, lifeless house. He didn't say anything as he stepped out. He walked up to the front door and stopped. No knock, no movement. Just stood there, still as a statue. I waited about 30 seconds, watching from the car. Then I drove off, making absolutely sure the doors were locked this time. About 3 blocks away, I pulled over under a streetlight and just sat there, trying to make sense of it all. I stayed there 10 minutes, debating whether I should call the police. But what would I even report? A man got into my car twice, said a few strange things, and walked away. As far as I knew, no laws were broken. Eventually, I just drove home. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I filed a report with Uber. But part of me still wishes I had contacted the police instead. That man clearly wasn't okay, and maybe he needed help. I don't know if that house really belonged to his parents or if he was in the middle of some kind of episode, but I sincerely hope no one was hurt. I'm 18 years old and live by myself in an apartment just outside of town, about 8 miles out. I've got a dog for company, and while I love the peace and quiet, getting food delivered can be a bit of a hassle at times. I never really worried about using Uber Eats. Sure, you hear some weird stories now and then, but I never thought anything strange would happen to me. At least that's what I used to think. It was a Friday evening, and I was in the middle of cleaning my place to get ready for my boyfriend's visit. We're long distance and usually only see each other on weekends, so I like to have everything in order before he arrives Saturday. I'd already been cleaning for a couple of hours, and by the time it got past 6 p.m., I was starving. I didn't want to mess up the kitchen again after just scrubbing everything down, so I figured ordering takeout would be the easiest option. I placed an order and soon got the notification that my driver was on the way in a white Honda Fit Sport. Since I live alone, I've set my delivery instructions for contactless drop-off. Just leave the food at the door. I was relaxing in the living room watching TV when the app pinged to say my order had been delivered. Hungry and excited, I got up right away to grab it. But when I opened the door, there was nothing there. I thought maybe the driver had left it at the wrong door, so I glanced down the hallway to check the other doorsteps. Still nothing. A bit confused, I went back inside to message the driver and ask what happened. But before I could do that, there was a knock at my door. It was my neighbor. He was standing there holding my food and said, "Hey, sorry, I took this from your delivery guy because he was looking through your windows, and I didn't know what he was doing." I thanked him and took the bag, completely thrown off by what he just told me. I stood there for a moment, wondering what exactly had just happened, and what the driver might have been doing if my neighbor hadn't stepped in. After that unsettling moment with my neighbor, I went back inside, ate my food, and settled in with a movie to try and relax. Later that night, I took a shower, made sure all the doors were locked, and turned off the TV before heading to bed. I called my boyfriend like I usually do before sleeping, and at some point during the call, I drifted off. But my sleep didn't last long. I woke up a few times to my dog growling, sometimes at the window, sometimes at the back door. Now, he's not some big guard dog. He's a tiny 5-pound Morkie, but when he growls like that, especially in the middle of the night, it definitely puts you on edge. Eventually, I managed to get him to settle down, and we both went back to sleep. But maybe 10 or 15 minutes later, I was jolted awake by loud banging against my window. This time my dog went nuts, barking, growling, even letting out these low whimpers. I froze. I couldn't move at first. I pulled the blanket over my head, just enough to leave my eyes uncovered so I could keep watch on the window. Then I grabbed my phone and quietly called the police, whispering into the receiver as I told the dispatcher that someone was in my backyard. What scared me even more was the fact that my window doesn't lock properly. It can be lifted without much effort. The dispatcher calmly told me to move to a different room and assured me officers were on their way. I ran into the kitchen, grabbed a knife from the drawer, and waited, staring out the window, hoping to see flashing lights or hear the sound of a siren. Those next few minutes felt like hours. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted something across the street. Parked in the open field beside my apartment, the one people usually use for trailers or walking dogs, was the same white car that had delivered my food earlier. The Uber driver's car. It was just sitting there. I couldn't see anyone inside, but I immediately knew what that meant. He was in my backyard. When the police finally pulled up, I could barely get the words out. I was trembling, tears running down my face as I explained everything to one of the officers. Meanwhile, another officer went around back to check the yard, right outside my bedroom window. A third officer arrived and headed over to the car still parked in the open field, but when he checked, the driver wasn't inside. The two officers returned and spoke quietly with the one who had been taking my statement. I overheard one of them mention finding footprints in the backyard. Because it had rained the night before, the ground was soft and muddy, making it easy to see where someone had been walking. My stomach dropped. That meant someone really had been back there. And what scared me most was not just that, but the fact that this guy wasn't in custody and wasn't in his car. Where was he? At that point, my neighbor came outside, likely hearing all the commotion. The officers brought him up to speed on what had happened, and he mentioned to them how he had intercepted the delivery earlier when he saw the driver acting suspiciously at my window. Trying to be kind, my neighbor offered to let me stay the night at his place so I wouldn't be alone. It was a generous offer, but for some reason I declined. Once the police left, I went back inside, thinking the worst of it was behind me. It took a while to calm down enough to even lie down, and eventually, I did start to drift off. But just after 2 a.m., loud knocking jolted me awake, this time on my front door, and then I heard it. Police! My heart was pounding. I couldn't believe this was still happening. I hesitated but eventually opened the door. It was the same female officer I had spoken with earlier. She told me that they'd actually stayed nearby, watching the apartment just in case the guy came back. And he did. They caught him walking up to my door again, apparently looking for another way to get inside. My heart dropped when I heard that. She assured me that he'd been arrested and that I didn't need to worry anymore. I thanked her, closed the door, and tried to rest again. But this time, sleep wouldn't come. After that night, I stopped using Uber Eats anytime I was home alone. I was 26 at the time and male. This all happened while I was in Washington, D.C., visiting my fiancée. Let's call her Sarah, for the sake of this story. She had just completed basic training, and her graduation ceremony was a big moment for her and her family. She asked me to come out for it, and of course I said yes. I had booked my flight so I'd arrive about a week before Sarah's family. The idea was to have a few days together, just the two of us, before things got hectic with all her relatives coming in for her graduation. During that time, she stayed with me at my hotel, and we decided to make the most of it by exploring some of the historical landmarks around D.C. I'd never been to Washington before, so the chance to see all the major sites really excited me. We ended up spending nearly 4 hours walking through the city, visiting everything from the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument to the Capitol Building and even the White House. It was genuinely a great experience for me, especially since I'd missed out on the high school trip that usually brought students to these places. Sarah seemed happy that I was so into it too, and we had a great time just wandering around and taking it all in. Eventually, after enough sightseeing and plenty of walking, we decided it was time to head back to the hotel. We had used Uber earlier that day to get there without any issues, so we figured we'd just do the same for the return trip. Sarah pulled out her phone and requested a ride, while I found a shady spot to sit down and rest. After all that walking, I was pretty wiped out and ready to crash for a while back at the hotel. About 10 minutes later, a car pulled up right in front of us along the roadside. It wasn't a typical parking area, and it seemed a little odd for a car to stop there unless it was picking someone up. So when Sarah gestured toward it, I figured that had to be ours. I got up and followed her over. She opened the back door and asked the driver, "Uber for Sarah?" He gave a slight nod, didn't say anything, just a small motion of acknowledgement. Then she stepped inside. I got into the van right after Sarah and shut the door behind me. Looking back now, I can't believe how careless we were. Neither of us asked for the driver's name, nor did we check if the car matched the one listed in the app. Since Sarah had ordered the ride on her phone, I didn't think much about verifying any of it myself at the time. It just didn't cross my mind. We both sat in the back seat of a gray minivan. The driver didn't say a word to us, not even a simple hello or name confirmation. That stood out to me right away. Every other Uber ride I'd taken, the driver would at least greet me or double-check who they were picking up, but this guy, nothing. He just nodded once when Sarah asked if he was there for her, and then started driving. I picked up on how strange it was, but I was exhausted and didn't feel like striking up a conversation. I leaned back in the seat, closed my eyes, and tried to rest a little. Not long after, maybe 5 minutes into the ride, Sarah tapped my arm. I opened my eyes and turned to look at her. She didn't say anything, but I could tell something was wrong by the look on her face. She showed me her phone. It was still tracking the route from the Uber app, and I immediately noticed we weren't going the right way. We were headed in the exact opposite direction of our hotel. I watched her face go pale. Then, right as we were trying to make sense of it, a notification popped up on her screen. "Your Uber has arrived," followed by a message from the actual driver asking where we were. That's when it hit me hard. We had gotten into the wrong car. My stomach dropped. I hadn't double-checked the license plate, the make of the car, or the driver's photo, and now, sitting in this van with someone who clearly wasn't our ride, the reality of the situation sank in. I turned my head slightly toward the driver, but I didn't say a word. I had no idea what this man was planning or what he might be capable of, and I wasn't interested in finding out. What I did know was that I needed to get Sarah and myself out of that van as calmly and quickly as possible. I leaned forward and said in the most neutral tone I could manage that we had changed our minds and would prefer to be dropped off where we were. I hoped it would seem casual, like we weren't suspicious, just indecisive. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror for the first time, really acknowledging us since we got in. His eyes locked on mine for what felt like a full minute, even though it was probably only 10 seconds. Still, he didn't say anything. He didn't slow down, didn't stop, just kept driving, as if I hadn't said a word. At that point, whatever sense of patience or calm I had left was gone. Everything in me was screaming that we were in danger. Without hesitating, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my pocket knife. I flipped the blade open and held it tightly. Then, in a steady voice, I told him, "I know you're not our Uber driver. I don't know what you're planning to do, but I have a knife, and if you don't pull over right now, I won't hesitate to use it." His eyes snapped back to the mirror. This time, I knew he saw the knife in my hand, and the message was clear. He immediately pulled the van to the side of the road, and I heard the locks click open. Sarah and I didn't wait. We jumped out of the vehicle as fast as we could. The second we were out, he hit the gas and took off. We stood there for a moment, trying to collect ourselves. Sarah was overwhelmed and starting to panic, and I was still trying to mentally process what had just happened. Sarah immediately grabbed her phone and messaged the real Uber driver through the app, letting him know what had happened and sharing our exact location. Thankfully, he responded quickly and arrived within minutes. This time, we double-checked everything: the car, the license plate, the driver's face. There was no room for error. Once we got in, we told him what we had just experienced. That's when he told us something that sent a chill straight through me. He explained that there had been several recent cases in the area where people had been impersonating Uber drivers, using the confusion to target unsuspecting tourists or out-of-towners who wouldn't think twice about getting into the wrong vehicle. He said some of those people had gone missing, and they could only guess what might have happened to them. Then he looked at us and said, "You're lucky. You caught on before it was too late, and you weren't far from where you got in. That probably made the difference. And it helped that you were prepared." We got back to the hotel without any more issues, and right away we contacted the police. We gave them a full report, descriptions of the man and his vehicle, every detail we could recall. They told us they'd follow up if they found anything, but we never heard back. To this day, I don't know if that man was ever caught, and it still bothers me to think he might still be out there doing the same thing to someone else. I've had a lot of time to reflect on how careless we were that day. Not checking the car, not confirming the driver. So if you're listening to this, take it seriously. Always verify the driver, always match the car, and never assume you're safe just because someone pulls up and looks the part. Stay alert. It can make all the difference.